They didn't fall in love with you on purpose, and that's exactly why they can't escape it now. What started as something casual, something controlled, has already crossed a line they never saw. And now, no matter what they do, it follows them. Love rarely begins as a deliberate act of decision. More often, it emerges from layers of unconscious processes that operate beneath awareness. When someone appears to fall for another person, what is actually happening is a gradual alignment of emotional triggers, personal history, unmet needs, and psychological projections converging in one direction. The individual does not consciously choose this shift. Instead, they experience it as something that happens to them, as if they are being pulled by an invisible force they cannot fully name or control. At the deepest level, attraction is not simply about the other person's external qualities. It is about what the psyche recognizes in them. Certain traits, behaviors, or emotional tones activate internal patterns formed long before the present moment. These patterns are often rooted in early emotional experiences, unresolved attachments, or idealized images of connection. When someone unknowingly reflects these internal structures, the mind interprets it as familiarity, intensity, or special connection, even though the person may not fully understand why. This is why love can begin without intention. The conscious mind may still believe it is observing, evaluating, or simply interacting casually, while the unconscious mind has already started forming emotional bonds. These bonds develop through subtle reinforcement, shared attention, emotional resonance, moments of vulnerability, and perceived understanding. Each of these experiences strengthens an internal association that grows stronger over time. What makes this process particularly powerful is that it bypasses rational control. The more someone tries to analyze or manage their feelings, the more they discover that the emotional current has already taken shape. At that point, love is no longer a decision being made in real time. It is a psychological state that has already been constructed quietly in the background of awareness long before the person realizes they are inside it. Emotional attachment often forms before a person can intellectually recognize what is happening because the mind does not build bonds in a linear or fully conscious way. Instead, it develops them through repeated emotional micro-experiences that accumulate beneath awareness. A glance that feels meaningful, a conversation that creates comfort, a moment of being understood without explanation. These instances do not appear significant individually, but together, they begin shaping an internal emotional map of connection. The unconscious system prioritizes emotional resonance over logical evaluation, while the conscious mind may still categorize the interaction as casual, friendly, or uncertain. The emotional layer is already recording patterns of safety, curiosity, and psychological relief. This early-stage attachment is subtle. It does not announce itself with clarity. It manifests instead as increased attention toward the person, heightened emotional sensitivity to their behavior, and a growing sense of anticipation when they are present or absent. What makes this process particularly complex is that attachment is reinforced by inconsistency as much as by consistency. Moments of emotional closeness followed by distance create a stronger imprint than predictable interaction. The mind becomes engaged in trying to resolve the emotional ambiguity, and this engagement deepens the bond without the individual realizing it. In this sense, attachment is not only about positive experiences, but also about unresolved emotional tension. By the time a person becomes aware that they are emotionally invested, the foundation has already been laid. The feeling does not emerge suddenly. It surfaces after it has already been developing for some time in the background. This is why people often misjudge when or how deeply they became attached. They believe it happened at a specific moment, but in reality, it was constructed gradually through accumulated emotional impressions that bypassed conscious observation entirely, forming a connection that feels sudden only in hindsight. The psyche has a natural resistance to anything that disrupts its internal equilibrium, even when that disruption is tied to desire. When someone begins to feel a strong emotional pull toward another person, a conflict often arises between attraction and self-protection. The conscious mind may interpret this pull as curiosity or interest, but deeper layers of the mind register it as a potential loss of stability. This is where resistance begins to form, not as rejection of the other person, but as an instinctive attempt to preserve internal order. Attraction can quietly activate aspects of the self that were previously dormant or unacknowledged. These might include emotional vulnerability, dependency, longing, or unmet psychological needs. The emergence of these elements creates discomfort because they challenge the image a person holds of themselves. As a result, the psyche responds defensively. It tries to distance, rationalize, or minimize the emotional experience in order to regain a sense of control. This resistance is not a denial of desire itself, but a reaction to the intensity of what desire reveals. When someone represents something deeply meaningful, they also become a mirror for inner fragmentation. The mind recognizes this and attempts to reject the intensity, even if the attraction remains strong. This creates an internal contradiction. One part moves toward connection, while another pulls away from it. The more significant the emotional impact, the stronger this resistance becomes. It is not unusual for individuals to interpret their own emotional intensity as a problem rather than an experience. They may label it confusion, distraction, or overthinking, when in reality, it is the psyche reacting to emotional depth that exceeds its usual comfort range. In this way, resistance is not the absence of feeling, but the tension created when feeling becomes too powerful to integrate smoothly into the existing structure of identity and control. When emotional intensity rises beyond a certain threshold, it can trigger an instinctive fear response within the psyche, even if the experience is pleasurable or deeply desired. This reaction is not rooted in logic, but in the nervous system's interpretation of intensity as potential instability. What feels like closeness or attraction on one level can simultaneously register as overwhelm on another, creating an internal split between desire and avoidance. The human mind is structured to maintain a sense of predictability and control. When someone enters a person's emotional world in a way that feels significant, unpredictable shifts begin to occur internally. Thoughts become more frequent, attention becomes more focused, and emotional responses become harder to regulate. For some individuals, this heightened internal activity is experienced as excitement at first, but it can quickly transform into unease because it disrupts their usual emotional balance. Fear does not necessarily appear as panic. More often, it manifests subtly as withdrawal, hesitation, overthinking, or sudden emotional detachment. The person may not consciously identify what they are afraid of, but the underlying sensation is linked to losing emotional control or becoming too affected by another person. The intensity of feeling creates a perception of vulnerability, and vulnerability is often interpreted as risk. This is why even positive emotional experiences can trigger defensive reactions. The psyche does not immediately distinguish between safe intensity and threatening intensity. It responds first to magnitude. If something feels too strong, too fast, or too consuming, the instinct is to reduce exposure to it, even if it is emotionally meaningful. In relationships, this creates a paradox where the very depth that draws someone in also activates fear-based distancing. The individual may feel pulled toward connection while simultaneously feeling the need to step back, not because the connection is unwanted, but because the internal system struggles to process the emotional scale of what is being experienced. Projection plays a central role in why certain connections feel unusually intense, as it allows a person to perceive aspects of their own unconscious mind through another individual. Instead of seeing the other person purely as they are, the mind overlays them with internal images, expectations, and unresolved emotional material. This process is automatic and largely invisible to the individual experiencing it. When someone encounters a person who activates deep emotional responses, the psyche begins to fill in gaps using stored psychological content. These stored contents are often formed from past relationships, unmet emotional needs, and idealized or feared versions of intimacy. As a result, the other person becomes less of a neutral individual and more of a symbolic figure representing something internal that has not yet been integrated. This is why attraction can feel disproportionate to actual familiarity. The emotional intensity is not always based on the present reality of the other person, but on the internal meaning assigned to them. The mind projects qualities such as safety, validation, understanding, or emotional completion onto them, even when those qualities are only partially or inconsistently present. This creates a sense of depth that feels compelling but is psychologically constructed. Projection also explains why emotional reactions can become exaggerated. Small behaviors from the other person may trigger strong responses because they are interpreted through the lens of what has been projected. A simple gesture can feel deeply significant, while a lack of response can feel disproportionately painful. The emotional system is responding not only to the external event, but to the internal meaning attached to it. Over time, projection creates a blurred boundary between perception and reality. The individual begins to interact more with their internal image of the other person than with the actual person themselves. This is what gives certain connections their obsessive or consuming quality, as the psyche is essentially engaging with its own unrecognized parts through the presence of another human being. When one person becomes emotionally significant to another, they often stop being perceived as a separate, fully independent individual and instead become a reflective surface for unconscious aspects of the self. This does not happen through deliberate interpretation, but through automatic psychological association. The mind continuously compares external experiences with internal emotional structures, and when someone triggers unresolved material, they begin to carry meaning far beyond their actual behavior or identity. In this dynamic, the other person becomes a symbolic presence rather than just a relational one. They represent qualities that may be underdeveloped, suppressed, or unacknowledged within the observer. These can include emotional depth, vulnerability, confidence, intimacy, or even perceived emotional danger. Because these traits are not fully integrated internally, the psyche externalizes them and attaches them to the other person, creating the illusion that the intensity originates from the relationship itself. This mirroring effect is powerful because it bypasses rational analysis. The individual may believe they are responding purely to the other person's actions, but in reality, they are reacting to what those actions awaken within them. Emotional responses become amplified because they are tied to self-recognition. A moment of attention can feel profoundly meaningful, not because of its objective weight, but because it activates a neglected part of the self that longs for acknowledgement. As this process continues, the boundary between self and other becomes increasingly blurred in emotional perception. The person begins to carry emotional significance that is disproportionate to external interaction. Even absence becomes meaningful because it triggers internal reflection. The connection feels deep because it is not limited to interpersonal exchange, but extends into intrapsychic exploration. This is why such relationships often feel transformative or destabilizing. They are not merely interactions between two individuals, but encounters between a person and aspects of themselves that have been projected outward and recognized through another human form. Inner conflict in relationships arises when two opposing psychological forces are activated at the same time: the drive toward emotional closeness and the instinct to preserve autonomy and emotional control. These forces do not operate in a balanced, rational way. Instead, they compete beneath awareness, producing inconsistent behavior, shifting emotions, and a persistent sense of tension. When a person experiences a meaningful emotional connection, part of the psyche moves toward it because it represents comfort, validation, or psychological completion. At the same time, another part interprets that same closeness as a potential loss of control, vulnerability, or disruption of identity. This creates a push-pull dynamic where the individual is simultaneously drawn in and pulled away, often without understanding why. The conflict is intensified when the emotional experience is deep or unfamiliar. If a person is not accustomed to strong emotional intimacy, the nervous system may interpret it as destabilizing rather than safe. As a result, the desire for connection becomes entangled with fear of exposure. This does not eliminate attraction, it complicates it. The person may feel emotionally invested one moment and detached the next, not because their feelings are absent, but because different internal systems are taking turns dominating behavior. This inner division often leads to rationalization. The individual may attempt to explain their shifting emotions through external reasons, such as timing, compatibility, or circumstance, when the real source is internal psychological conflict. The mind seeks explanations that reduce discomfort, even if they do not fully reflect the emotional reality. Over time, this dynamic creates emotional instability within the relationship experience itself. The connection becomes charged with uncertainty, not necessarily due to the other person's actions, but because the individual is navigating opposing internal impulses. The relationship becomes a space where attraction and resistance coexist, continuously shaping perception and behavior without resolution unless one of the internal forces becomes integrated or acknowledged consciously. What is denied within the psyche does not disappear, it shifts form and begins to exert influence from a less visible level of awareness. When a person suppresses an emotion, desire, fear, or aspect of themselves that feels uncomfortable or unacceptable, they are not eliminating it, but pushing it out of conscious recognition. This act of denial creates internal separation rather than resolution. Once separated from conscious awareness, the denied material does not remain inactive. It continues to seek expression, often indirectly through thoughts, emotional reactions, and external projections. In relationships especially, what is denied internally tends to be recognized externally in amplified form. A person may feel unusually triggered, intensely drawn, or emotionally unsettled by someone else, without realizing that the source of this intensity originates within their own unacknowledged psychological content. This is because the psyche has a compensatory tendency. It attempts to restore balance by bringing attention to what has been excluded. The more firmly something is denied, the more pressure it exerts beneath awareness. This pressure often manifests as obsession, fixation, emotional confusion, or repeated mental return to a particular person or idea. The mind keeps circling the same emotional material because it has not been fully processed or integrated. Denial also distorts perception. Instead of recognizing internal emotional states directly, the individual interprets them as being caused entirely by external circumstances. This creates a displacement of responsibility for the feeling. The external object becomes charged with meaning that actually belongs to the inner world. As a result, emotional intensity increases, but understanding decreases. Over time, What is denied grows in influence precisely because it is not consciously acknowledged. It begins to shape reactions, decisions, and interpretations in subtle ways. The psyche does not let unintegrated material remain silent indefinitely. It continuously attempts to bring it into awareness through repetition, emotional discomfort, and relational experiences that reflect what has been ignored internally. Love often carries a paradoxical effect where it reduces a person's sense of control over their own emotional state, even when the experience is desired. Control in this context refers not only to external behavior, but to internal regulation, the ability to predict, manage, and stabilize one's thoughts and feelings. When emotional attachment becomes strong, this stability begins to shift. The presence of deep emotional investment introduces unpredictability into the psyche. Thoughts become more repetitive, attention becomes more focused on a specific person, and emotional responses become more reactive. This reduces the mind's ability to maintain its usual structured flow of thinking. Instead of operating in a balanced and detached manner, awareness becomes centered around the emotional object of attachment, creating a sense that one's internal world is being influenced by something external. This perceived loss of control is often experienced as discomfort because the human mind naturally seeks coherence and predictability. When emotional intensity disrupts this coherence, the individual may feel as though they are no longer fully directing their own inner state. Even positive emotions, when strong enough, can produce this effect because they override habitual patterns of emotional regulation. What intensifies this experience is the spontaneous nature of emotional reactions. Feelings may arise without conscious intention, triggered by memory, anticipation, or subtle associations. This unpredictability creates the impression that emotions are happening to the individual rather than being generated by them. As a result, love begins to feel less like a chosen experience and more like an immersive state that temporarily overrides rational control. In this condition, the mind often oscillates between engagement and resistance. One part seeks closeness because of emotional reward, while another part attempts to regain control by distancing or rationalizing. This internal tension reinforces the perception that emotional control has been diminished, as the individual is no longer experiencing a stable, self-directed emotional environment, but a fluctuating one shaped by attachment dynamics. Transformation through emotional confrontation occurs when a person is exposed to feelings or relational dynamics that cannot be neatly avoided, rationalized, or controlled. In such moments, the psyche is forced to engage with material it would normally keep at a distance, often related to attachment, fear, dependency, identity, or unresolved emotional patterns. This confrontation does not feel gentle or linear. It feels disruptive because it interrupts the existing structure of how a person understands themselves and their relationships. When emotional intensity rises in a meaningful connection, it begins to activate internal contradictions. A person may simultaneously feel desire and resistance, attraction and fear, clarity and confusion. These contradictions are not signs of randomness, but indicators that deeper psychological layers are being stirred. The conscious mind, which prefers stability and definition, struggles to hold these opposing experiences at once, creating internal tension. This tension is precisely where transformation begins. The psyche cannot return to its previous state without resolving what has been activated. As a result, the individual is pushed into reflection, often unintentionally. They begin to question their reactions, their patterns of attachment, and their emotional boundaries. Even avoidance becomes part of the process, because avoidance itself reveals what holds emotional charge. Over time, repeated emotional confrontation weakens rigid internal assumptions. The person starts recognizing that their emotional responses are not purely caused by external events, but are shaped by internal interpretations, memories, and unmet needs. This realization shifts awareness inward, away from blaming external circumstances and toward understanding internal dynamics. Transformation does not require immediate resolution. It occurs gradually through repeated exposure to emotionally charged experiences that cannot be fully dismissed. Each encounter adds awareness, and each moment of discomfort exposes something previously unrecognized. The psyche reorganizes itself in response, integrating what was once fragmented. This integration is what changes perception, behavior, and emotional capacity over time, often without the individual consciously realizing when the shift began or how deeply it has already taken place. By the time awareness finally reaches a deeply emotional connection, the structure of attachment has often already been established beneath conscious perception. Emotional bonds are not constructed at the moment of recognition. They are formed gradually through accumulated experiences, interpretations, and unconscious associations that operate outside deliberate control. Awareness, in this sense, is not the beginning of the process but a delayed observation of something already in motion. The psyche builds relational meaning through repetition and emotional imprinting. Each interaction contributes a subtle layer, whether through attention, absence, intensity, or emotional resonance. These layers do not require conscious approval to take effect. They settle into memory systems that prioritize emotional significance over logical sequencing. As a result, the internal bond forms long before the individual can clearly identify its existence. When awareness finally arrives, it often appears sudden because it contrasts with the previous state of unknowing. However, this apparent suddenness is an illusion created by delayed recognition. The emotional system has already adapted to the presence of the other person, shaping expectations, reactions, and internal focus around them. The conscious mind simply catches up to what has been unfolding internally for some time. This delay between formation and recognition creates a psychological gap. Within this gap, individuals may attempt to reassess or reinterpret their feelings, believing they are deciding in real time. In reality, they are observing an established emotional structure that has already influenced perception and behavior. This is why emotional realization often feels irreversible or heavy. It is not the beginning of attachment, but the moment its full weight becomes visible. Once this awareness is present, it can also trigger reflection about how little conscious control was involved in the initial formation. The realization itself becomes part of the emotional process, revealing that connection is not simply chosen moment by moment, but gradually constructed in layers that only become fully visible when examined after they have already taken shape internally.